Hey, folks, I'm Rebecca, blonde in the belly of the beast. And today I have the much requested Christina. She is an independent journalist, director, and producer of Kidnap and Kill, an FBI terror plot, which we will get into very deeply. The Whitmer plot, there's just so much there. And I really want to talk about that as much as you're willing. I know we only have an hour, but
I
thank you so
know.
much for joining me. Did I even mention that you're Radix Verum? I didn't. But if you want to give like a
That's
little
okay.
brief intro
Oh,
about who
thank
you are,
you.
what you're doing, that would be great.
Yep, I'm just a regular person, just a mom in my basement. And I decided that, you know, I worked in law for a while. Like I was a paralegal. I have a very interesting background story, I guess. I don't want to get too much into it, but um, I have like when I was a kid, my mother was sort of like had struggles with mental illness and alcoholism. She threw me out when I was 17. So I went through a period of homelessness, and then I worked as a paralegal for a while and did other things. But I kind of just wanted to get into journalism, I guess. There were things that were important to me, especially things I saw like in the legal system after experiencing it firsthand. Like I, in high school, was in the criminal justice program, and I had this view of like, like the Law and Order CSI view of like law enforcement.
Yeah.
And so like they did like things where they would like they'd set up crime scenes and stuff for us, and I really enjoyed that aspect of like investigating something, collecting the evidence, and like getting to the truth of it. But then when you go and work in the legal system, you realize like the entire thing is a scam, and that it's actually evil and wicked. And you see like that it was nothing like it's portrayed, and then you want to go out and tell people about it. Like you want to fix the problems and the injustices, I guess. So I liked reporting on stories that I thought were undercovered, and I liked reporting on government corruption. So when the Whitmer thing happened, I had already been looking into PatCon, and I saw that as sort of like the PatCon 2.0. And I immediately knew that the story was a lie. So I started reporting on it, and then decided, for whatever reason, that I could make a documentary on it with zero
Well, there's just so
experience
much there.
ever
And
making a film. But yeah, the story is so massive, and people really don't know the full story. So that's sort of my background. I'm also an Orthodox Christian. So that's sort of how I view things, and my view of the world, and my understanding of like the origins of evil and things like that.
I do want to talk a little bit about that before we get into the Whitmer plot. I've seen some videos on your chaotic childhood and what it was like growing up and having a difficult upbringing. And you're a woman of faith, but could you talk a little bit? I don't want to. I have a tough question first, but do you think that God, through your chaotic childhood and all of that, was preparing you for the mission that you're on right now?
Yes. Yeah. And like I'm half German, half Italian, and I was raised by like the Italian side. So I had like a very religious Italian family, although they were Catholic. So from the time I was like a little girl, like I remember my aunt taking me and my sister into the bathroom, and like she had us accept Jesus into our hearts. And so I always was a Christian. But of course, I went to Catholic school in South
Mhm.
Florida, and I happened to go to the Catholic school where Congressman Mark Foley was an alumni, and he was one of the people that got caught in the Page Boy scandal. Then we had another priest from our parish who also was a predator, and the school had covered it up and lied to us about the whole thing and sent him over somewhere else and told us that his mother was dying, and that's why he was leaving and going back to Ireland or whatever. And so I had like a phase of not liking organized religion. But in
Well,
any case,
why?
yeah, I don't know. I think my childhood was very rough and difficult, and I've been through many struggles. I think that God maybe was preparing me, but at the time you don't think
You don't
that
realize
way.
it.
You're
Mhm.
like, why is this happening to me? Where is God? Why has he abandoned me? And things like that. It's not until you're like looking back that you're like, oh wow, if I didn't have those experiences, I wouldn't have the resilience and strength, or the empathy and compassion and the humility I have today.
That's absolutely true. I believe that we're in the trenches of spiritual warfare. And I hear some people call it a fight for the Western soul. Um, that is why this Whitmer case is so important. Even some conservatives still have this degree of trust in the government. They don't yet realize that the government hates us. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this spiritual warfare. I feel like they're specifically targeting dejected Americans that are robbed of their birthright. They have nothing to live for. Although one of the men that we'll be talking about has children, and that's a particularly tragic story. And they want to create this chilling effect for the millions upon millions of similar men and women out there. And I think that this is evil. This is evil, and how it's manifesting in the West. So I know you've done a lot of research on Waco and Ruby Ridge. Could we start by talking a little bit about why the FBI manufactures these domestic terrorist events and how they're related?
Yeah, I agree with you about spiritual warfare. I think that's what we're engaged in every single day. And I think it's on a personal level as well. It's not just what we see in the world, it's what we experience in our own lives, especially if you're trying to live a Christian life. The more that you do so, the more you experience spiritual attacks. So I think people have to have that understanding too, because that affects your emotions, your impulses, and how you act in the world, and then how everybody else does. So I think that if we want to make change, we have to change ourselves and our own hearts first. As far as why does the FBI manufacture these things? Well, they have to justify their own existence. And I also think that the FBI is a very dark institution. I think from its very inception and founding, it was created to be the sword and shield of the establishment. And they're always manufacturing some kind of threat that they can then swoop in and save people from. And post 9/11, it's been very bad. And it's gotten to the point where you don't have any of the constitutional rights you think you have. You don't.
Right.
They can indefinitely detain you. Like, they can put you under pretrial confinement. They can delay your hearing for 3 years. And just hold you there when you have no criminal record or history. Like, that's where things are now. And it's concerning to me because I remember all of the tactics they used in the global war on terror against so-called foreign terrorists. That's what they want to do to Americans now. If you listen to people like Michael Hayden, some of these former CIA, NSA directors, they say that the greatest threat facing America isn't the foreign threat, it's the domestic one.
It's the domestic alt-righters. We're just so scary. It's funny because I look around at my friends that are on the dissident right. It's all like tired moms and stuff. I'm like, I don't think we're the threat that we're being made out to be.
Yeah, real scary stuff here,
I know.
guys.
Can you talk a little bit about Ruby Ridge specifically?
I don't really. I'm focused so much on the Whitmer stuff, it would be difficult, and I don't want to misspeak, but I will say that the entire thing was the FBI fabricating a case against this guy because they wanted to target like the Aryan nations. And so they used an informant to sell him, I believe, like a gun barrel, or he somehow sawed it off by like a quarter of an inch or something.
Right. The reason that I ask is that it's just so similar in terms of entrapment tactics, and it was targeted. They were worried about the Aryan Nation in North Idaho, and they're worried about Midwestern militiamen.
Randy Weaver was not a member of the Aryan Nations. He just happened to be like neighbors with them.
Yeah. And he did some like light trading. He hung out with him a few times.
I mean, they maybe had similar like anti-government views, but these are views that really like every American has, or like most Americans should have or should be. I mean, it's like literally the founding of our country is freeing ourselves from tyranny. So there should be that healthy like distrust of the government. And I think it's crazy that this is now puts you on a list. If you question the government, they call you an anti-government extremist. So he was targeted in that way. And I think he was supposed to go to court. He didn't go to court because it was literal nonsense. And so the FBI did sort of like they had a standoff. They were trying to arrest him, and they murdered his wife as she was holding a baby. They murdered his son. I think they killed the dog, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And his son was with his
for no
friend.
reason.
For no
just
reason
because
at all,
he had proximity to somebody they wanted to target. And also I would suggest that the group that they wanted to target, they had already by that point probably infiltrated and may in fact have created.
Right.
So there's that.
And we're seeing the same level of infiltration now with the Whitmer plot, and I just don't feel like people are talking about it enough. So I know everybody has some knowledge of the Whitmer plot, but for audience members that are not deeply familiar, especially with the kidnapping plot and the informants, the federal informants involved, would you mind just going through some of the basics of the case?
Yes. It's going to be very difficult to try
I
to like
know.
to break this down because people still don't realize that they wanted it to be like a multi-state domestic terror plot, and it wasn't just Michigan. There were guys from Michigan, but there were people from other states, like Barry Croft. One of the people framed as a ringleader was a middle-aged father truck driver that lived in Bear, Delaware. Like, why does he want to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer? This is just ridiculous.
What does he care? Right.
But there's 14 men that were arrested, and I'll break down the charges. 14 guys were arrested October 7th. So we're actually one day after the 4-year anniversary of the arrests of these men. And so 14 were arrested October 7, 2020, and 6 were charged federally with conspiracy to kidnap. They added a superseding indictment and added additional charges of like WMDs to 3 other guys, like literally. And then
weren't they they were like trying to blow up random stuff when they were shit-faced and that was it?
Yes, but I'll get to the story of like how they tried to justify this, which was their insertion of an undercover Fed who was offering the sale of explosives to people who weren't really interested in it. So they had their conspiracy to kidnap, then WMDs for 3 of the guys who were the 6 charged federally. Then 8 guys were charged at the state level by the state of Michigan for, quote, providing material support to DT, felony firearms, and gang affiliation. So these are the charges. Like, they're insane. That the Justice Department said that this was the biggest DT case in a generation. So these are like audacious claims that require a lot of evidence. To make a long story short and to explain, because each guy comes into this at different times with different levels of like involvement to things. Most of these people, like they didn't know each other prior to the FBI getting involved. Like, the FBI introduced them to each other, the people that the feds call co-conspirators, or some of them only met like a handful of times at events that were put on by the FBI.
Right.
And so
how many unindicted co-conspirators were there?
There's 20 unindicted co-conspirators. And then, there's just people who like maybe showed up to one of these field training exercises. And so they were like a witness. But they're told that they could be charged, like, for what?
Yeah.
For showing up to an event that you like arranged. And it's a crazy story. So I want to talk about some of this. One of the groups was a group called the Wolverine Watchmen. Now, this was portrayed by the media as like a right-wing militia group. The Wolverine Watchmen was a Facebook group. It was created in November 2019 by a Marine reservist, Joe Morrison, who worked with his father, Pete Musico. I believe they were chimney sweeps, like they're working class men. So he is a young guy in his 20s, and Pete is his father-in-law, who's, I think, in his late 40s, maybe 50s. So they create this Wolverine Watchmen group, this Facebook page, with the intent of sort of like where they live out in the country in Jackson County in Michigan. It's a very rural area. Mm-hmm. During the time, that this was going on, COVID was just starting to happen. And there were other things going on that he wanted to create like a prepping group, right? Mm-hmm. So people that were out in the country, they need to kind of take care of each other. And that was sort of the idea, is that different people have different skills, and somebody can teach medical, somebody could teach firearms stuff. And they would just like hang out in their backyard and like shoot their guns and drink. That's what it was. It's like a prepping group and a little online like Facebook page. So that's late November of 2019. That's created. Prior to this, one of the main informants who orchestrated this, who is a convicted child sex offender and career criminal with a history of working for the FBI as an informant for biker gangs in the 80s, he becomes an informant officially, according to the FBI in their CHS file in October of 2019. So this is a month before the Wolverine Watchmen even exist. He is making contact with people online. He reports what he called threats of violence amongst 3%ers. These threats were never documented, so it's just his word of like how they claim he became an informant and why. I believe this to be a cover story. It doesn't ring true to me, and it's very similar to Dan Chappell, the other lead informant's cover story. He claims he joined the Facebook page of the Wolverine Watchmen, went through the vetting question, got into the encrypted group chat, and saw threats of violence against law enforcement that he also didn't document, despite the fact that he had a smartphone and could have taken a screenshot right then and there. Didn't happen. It's very convoluted. It's very complex. Now, what we know now, what we didn't know before, is that Steve Robeson, the pedo informant who became an informant in October of 2019, officially, he came on the FBI's radar through something called Operation Bronze Griffin. This was a program run by big tech companies, social media companies. Basically, they were pinging people that use certain keywords, and they were voluntarily giving this information to the government, presumably in some type of database. Right. And so this is without the government seeking a warrant, but he comes on the radar through that. And it looks like he makes contact with Barry in January of 2020 online via Facebook. And it seems that Barry had also been on the Fed's radar going back to 2017 because he had a podcast, and he was friends with some guy named Casey Massey that was a border defender that died under suspicious circumstances in 2014 that he was talking about. And the FBI, for whatever reason, in Texas, despite Barry, again, living in Delaware, opened in what they call an intelligence assessment on him in April of 2019. So this is all very weird, right?
Yeah.
He probably got onto the Bronze Griffin database, and then Roby was probably told, make contact with him. Roby pretended to be a friend of Casey Massey, his friend who passed away, and befriended Barry that way. So this is like entrapment. It's so clear cut. It's stunning. In any case, Dan Chappell, he joins the Wolverine Watchmen group, this Facebook page, in March of 2020. So the group is just created November 2019, this Facebook page. It had maybe 15 members at that point. It was a private group, by the way. He claims that he was searching online for pro-2A groups and came across it via the Facebook algorithm, which is a complete lie. Anybody that's familiar with Facebook knows that's not how it works. And he said he wanted to maintain his perishable tactical skills because he's an Iraq War veteran. This is Dan Chappell, the other main informant, and how he joins the group. So I want to say he joins in March. By June, probably, of 2020, he has become the XO of the Wolverine Watchmen, which was a prepping group, but is now kind of morphing into a quasi-militia group, but it's not many people and it's not very organized. But Dan Chappell starts training them in like tactical training. This is all still stuff that's perfectly legal, defensive firearms training that you can go actually pay thousands of dollars to get. So there's nothing, they're not doing anything nefarious. Right. Paul Beller is one of the members of the Wolverine Watchmen, a young kid. He was in the Army. From the time he was 14, he like volunteered at the Milford Fire Department. He was somebody that was like a first responder, joined the Army. He joins the group and he's kind of teaching them medical skills. So that's what it is. That's the kind of thing that they're doing. But in the backdrop of this, you guys have to remember, is COVID, it's lockdowns, and then it's rioting after, May of 2020, we have
right.
St. Floyd and the Summer of Love.
So they're pissed off and they have nowhere to go. They're locked down.
Yeah, they're locked down. You've got a bunch of guys who they can't work. There's all this stuff happening. They're concerned. They think that what their governor is doing is unconstitutional. Her crazy mandates. I think people forget also how insane that was. Like she put COVID patients into nursing homes and
Mhm.
thousands of people died.
Mhm.
Some of these guys had to like talk to their families through the windows outside of the nursing home. Like they couldn't even go in. So you had to talk to your loved one through this little glass window. It just very disturbing stuff. She made it so that you couldn't buy seeds, you couldn't cut hair. It just crazy stuff. And but at the same time, liquor stores can be open,
Right.
marijuana dispensaries can be open,
But no
she can go
gyms.
party.
Right.
Gyms were closed. That was something that upset Adam Fox, the guy who they framed as the ringleader, the homeless man living in the basement of the vacuum repair shop. Going to the gym was like one of the only things he had that helped his mental health. He suffers from anxiety and depression. And so we can talk about him. He was never a member of the Wolverine Watchmen. So basically, the FBI sent their informant to infiltrate what was a Facebook page. The FBI also has what they call OCEs, online covert employees. We know they utilize them in this case. That's FBI agents whose job is to literally maintain false personas online, create Facebook pages, administer these pages, pose as militia members themselves. It's people need to know that this is what they're doing. And so they take over this group. The FBI is essentially leading the group, training these guys, and then calling meetings, trying to ask hypotheticals, getting these guys drunk, giving them marijuana, and then recording them answering these, having these conversations basically.
Mhm.
And so I'll try to go into a chronological timeline so I can keep everything together. There's so much information, and this is just like barely getting into it. Around April of 2020, there are anti-lockdown pro 2A rallies happening. And these rallies were attended not just by like one side of the political sphere. Everybody was mad about the lockdowns. You had
Right.
regular people, leftists, people on the
Mhm.
right, everybody all agreed that it was bad. And I think they didn't like that. But one of these rallies, I believe it was called the American Patriot Rally. There was one April 15, 2020. This one was April 30th, 2020. The FBI has some of the Wolverine Watchmen. They know they're going to go, and their informant is basically the leader of the group at this point. And so they go, and the media runs with this story of like right-wing militia groups storming the Capitol. Nobody stormed the Capitol. They showed up to an event with their firearms and full kits and whatnot, but other people did the same thing. Hundreds of other people that were there, also in the same dress, same, were there, that were not attached to the Watchmen. It wasn't like it was just them. They
But
they
they're like,
waited in
Watchmen,
line.
private tour for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the FBI decided, hey, let's orchestrate a photo op, right? They, according to their own internal documentation, claim they believe Pete Musico had a live grenade on him. And so the FBI said, hey, let's call the Lansing Capitol Police and tell them to stand down, open the doors, and let all these people in, including the person we believe has a live grenade while all these lawmakers are in there. So they do that. They get their photo op. Adam Fox is there. And he has not met any of the Wolverine Watchmen. He doesn't really know them. I think he met Eric Molitor once with from some Michigan Home Guard like online course or something. But like they don't really know each other, these people who were framed.
Mhm.
So we think this is when maybe Adam gets on the FBI's radar, because there's video of him inside the Capitol kind of with his girlfriend Amanda Keller like shouting in the face of police, but they didn't do anything. Nobody attacked anybody. They just protested for 4 hours, like occupied the place, and then they left peacefully. But that narrative was seeded that these right-wing militia groups were storming the Capitol, and that's just one thing that they basically set up and staged. Now, I want to clarify one thing. Pete did not have a live grenade on him. He had like one of these, things that you buy at like a military surplus store where it's like hollowed out. Like, I don't believe the FBI actually thought he had a live grenade on him.
Yeah.
I think they say that in their documents to make it sound like they had, you know, reason to be like watching these guys or doing what they were doing to them. So I don't buy that, but you know, that's what they claim. I find that funny. They had a mobile command center, like as this was happening, with agents around, like monitoring this all. They had like a drone flying overhead at 6,000 feet. They're like staging theatrical productions almost. And so this is before J6. Just to kind of throw that out there, another connection is Stephen D'Antuono, the head of the Detroit field office at the time. The special agent in charge was promoted by Christopher Wray 1 week after these men were arrested in 2020 to be the assistant director of the DC field office, as he oversaw another storming of the Capitol that involved lots of undercovers and informants and, you know, groups that the FBI claims were extreme that day, that, you know, they had infiltrated well before this. One other aspect to this is that the FBI themselves created like militia groups. So they create every group that's like mentioned and referenced in the actual like case is created by the FBI, except the Wolverine Watchmen. But you could say even that was created by the FBI in a sense. And I don't want to give too much away because I want people to see it in the documentary. You're going to find out like they basically did create the Watchmen, and Joe Morrison was not really a leader of anything, and he wasn't really involved in certain things. Like, he didn't attend every meeting or every FTX. It was Dan Chappell that was doing this stuff along with Steve Robeson, the two lead informants, but they used a network of 12 informants. We know the identities of about half of them. Half we still don't even know who they were. They're probably still operating today in militia groups, you know, possibly even ones created by the FBI. So Robeson was posing at this time, at the time he introduced himself and inserted himself into the lives of these people, like Barry Croft, who was framed as a ringleader and spiritual leader. He's posing as the head of the Wisconsin chapter of a group called the Patriot 3 Percenters. He later tells these people he's become a national commander of this, again, militia group that is literally led by the FBI. Okay, there were other people in his group, but they didn't know that who he was and that he was an informant. So they didn't know they were being used by the FBI. So some of these informants, he made heads of like fake chapters of his militia group. So Jenny Plunk, one of the informants, was posing as the head of the Tennessee chapter of this fake militia group. They had a guy posing as the head of the Indiana chapter. So you just need to like understand this. They call a meeting, the FBI. They say Barry Croft called this meeting. He did not. They called and shared a meeting June 6, 2020 at a hotel in Columbus, Ohio called the Drury Inn. Now they dubbed it the Dublin meeting. This meeting they called a national attack planning meeting, where they claim that essentially various militia groups across the Midwest, angry about lockdowns, wanted to come together to plan multi-state like attack, or to talk about conducting attacks, or, you know, overthrowing the government and kicking off the Boogaloo, another FBI fabrication. And so they call and chair this meeting led by their pedo informant. And at this meeting are 4 FBI informants, all wearing recording devices. Everybody else that shows up, the other 10 people, are all targets of the FBI from various states. So these people like would not have come together at all had the FBI not set up the meeting.
How is this not legally entrapment? Could you give some of the strongest evidence that this was entrapment?
I mean, that right there, I think, is pretty strong. The quote, national attack planning meeting was set up by them. The gentleman, Adam Fox, who they said was the ringleader, he never would have met Barry Croft without them setting up the events for them to meet in person. You know, he maybe knew some of these people online, like from Facebook, but you know, you have tons of people that, like, I know I follow tons of people online that doesn't, if I've never met them in person, I don't know
Then
them.
who cares?
You know,
Yeah.
you're not like associates, you're not co-conspirators of some insane plot. No. So that the fact that they introduce the people to each other, I think that's the biggest evidence of it. The way that Adam was strung along by Dan Chappell, who befriended him and told him things like, oh, you know, when I was in the military and we wanted to train guys, we had to train them for missions. You know, we had to have a mission focus or mission specific, and was pushing for him to come up with like plans, goals, ideas. Adam is talking about, and we have some of this audio from, you know, these different meetings and FTXs, that stands for field training exercises, that the FBI put on, where we hear him saying, you know, things where it's very clear that he's not leading anything, he's not in control of anything. They inducted him into the Michigan chapter of the FBI's fake militia group. That right there is entrapment. Their informant said, hey, you are now the head of the state of Michigan for this militia group created by the FBI, gave him business cards that match Steve Robeson's business cards. I have both of them. So the FBI made business cards for him, put logos on it, and then used that stuff to say these are domestic terror symbols. And they said, you know, Adam created a militia group and recruited people. No, they created the Facebook page for Adam's Michigan chapter. The FBI created it. The FBI administered it. The first person to post on it to welcome everybody to the group June 20th of 2020, right after the Dublin meeting called by Steve Robeson, was Steve Robeson. And his post ends by saying, guns up, long live the Republic. And he's, you know, welcoming people to Adam's group? I don't think so. It was Steve Robeson's fake national militia group. And then the people that Adam recruited for it, all of them were FBI except two people.
Yeah. I think one of the most egregious parts of this story is how Adam was treated by Dan. And there's this text. I don't know if you remember the exact verbiage, but it's Adam texting Dan saying he doesn't want to do this. He's like, I don't want to do this. And then he's apologizing because Dan cultivated this this fatherly relationship with him, which is so messed up.
Sick.
Like the deep psychological torment that he must be going through. So I think that when we think about feds and how feds are infiltrating our groups, typically we think that they're like single men and they're not developing these deep relationships with people, but that seems to not be their tactic anymore. No. I think that they're developing very deep relationships with people.
Steve Robeson was a married father. He would lead people in prayer. He was a person that, and so was Dan, that if you needed something at 2:00 in the morning, your car broke down, they would come, they'd show up, they'd help you fix it. They might offer to pay for it. Like if you didn't have any food to eat, they would pick you up and take you to Buffalo Wild Wings, get you drunk, give you food, and then record you. That's what they're doing. But they befriended people and cultivated very close relationships with them. And people have said to me things, you know, comments that, to the effect that these guys were stupid, that they didn't know better, that they didn't know that they were surrounded by feds. No, it's not like that. A lot of the informants, they're regular people. They're not FBI agents. They're somebody you might have known for years prior to this. And then the FBI approaches them and makes them an informant and offers to pay them money. The informants were financially incentivized to try to manufacture crimes. And when they got the guys saying something incriminating, they were rewarded with envelopes of cash. So
is that how most federal informants are made? I think some of them are bribed to get out of charges also, or threatened with charges.
That too. Right. But sometimes, you know, the FBI is opportunistic and they approach people who are already in the right place at the right time. Maybe it's your girlfriend, like for Adam Fox. Maybe it is somebody that you know, or it's somebody who's already a member of a militia group and then they turn them. or something like that. And one of the things that we touch on in the documentary briefly is the FBI may have had an operation in 2018 to basically infiltrate all of these militia groups. We've heard reports of people who were part of militia groups like the 3%ers, etc., who were approached by the FBI in 2018 and asked to give membership lists. They were asked to give information on all their members into a cloud database for the FBI. Many of these
Who would
people
do that? So they stepped down, right? And then they got replaced
and
by
then
FBI informants.
we believe at that point the FBI inserted many of their informants into these roles, and we think that's how some of them were already posing as heads of different state chapters of fake militia groups, you know, when the Whitmer thing happened in 2020. So thinking about that, that's like years in the making of some of these people can be informants for 10 years in a militia group, and you may not know because charges might not ever come of it. That was a big thing with PACON and why it took so long for PACON to finally be disclosed. It didn't result in the kinds of prosecutions that things that were like COINTELPRO, how that did, where you would get that discovery, where you would hear about these operations. So I think people need to understand that it's not as black and white. It's not as easy to spot a Fed as you think it is. It could be anybody around you, and it could be the last person you suspect. Dan Chappell, for example, in many ways, these guys viewed him as like a reliable person. He talked about being a father, you know, and a single dad and whatnot. Like he developed a rapport with these people. And that's also why they felt comfortable speaking so freely the way they did. And that's the whole case is the FBI putting them in situations and recording it and then using that to say you should convict them of a kidnapping conspiracy and WMDs and whatnot. I want to touch on the field training exercises that were put on by the FBI. Those were field training exercises, FTXs. This is something militia groups do where they get together, they do their training, firearms, medical training. The FBI hosted a series. They basically put on the Cambria FTX in July of 2020, where they invited these guys from Michigan to go to Wisconsin to a friend of Steve Robeson's to that property for a joint training exercise. And the goal of this was to make it look like militia groups from other states were getting together to train together to try to pull off a plan to kidnap their governors all at the same time.
So this was the multiple states angle that they were trying to cultivate, right?
Yes. And of course, they couldn't get this off the ground. Like the guy they wanted to go after, Ralph Northam, was a disabled Vietnam veteran from Virginia named Frank Butler, who's like in his late 60s, early 70s. You know, it's like an elderly man. And Dan Chappell and the FBI were trying to get him to manufacture homemade explosives. They were trying, I believe they sent him ingredients for like a way to make homemade explosives using like sugar and Drano and like household items. And then Dan Chappell told him to double the ingredients. Luckily, Frank Butler didn't try to make the explosives, but they were trying to get him to do a plot. And this was mainly Steve Robeson, the FBI, via their pedo informant, offered the use of an explosives-laden drone for a plan to attack Ralph Northam at his vacation cottage in North Carolina. So imagine that, like an explosives-laden drone flying into like a governor's vacation cottage, and then what? Like exploding? What was going to happen here?
Right.
What did they want people to think was going to happen? It's just pretty crazy. As far
is this
as
the event where there were people that were charged for providing material support?
So they were charged for providing material support just for the fact that like Joe Morrison created the Wolverine Watchmen. So, and then the government says, you know, they wanted to kidnap the governor. So that's the material support they provided.
Oh, okay. So I read that one of the guys was charged with this based on like having shown people how to tie a tourniquet at one of these FBI events.
That was Paul, right? That was how he, quote, provided material support, was that he did the medical training at the FTX that was basically put on by
which
the
of course is
FBI.
not a crime. So how do you
No.
think that people can spot a federal informant if we're in these situations? Because like I mentioned earlier, I do believe that this was to create a chilling effect around anybody that is attempting to organize, even in an innocuous way. So I think the best way that we can deal with this is to get really on identifying these people. And one of the ways that I can tell, at least from living in North Idaho, is that there are people that are always trying to get you to say explicit things about organizing or using force, or they pose these weird hypothetical situations to try. And I think that they're constantly wired up. So could you talk a little bit about that?
No, I think that's a perfect way to explain it. It's very hard to spot them unless you know what you're looking for. And it's one of those things where you have to use your discernment. You have to cultivate discernment. You have to ask for it from the Holy Spirit, because you may not know, it may not be as obvious. Dan, in many ways, he did push for goals and objectives, but there were other things that, you know, he would make you feel like it was, oh, we're just kind of LARPing to get the guys focused for training. You know, it's not real, but we're just pretend like, you know, like they're in on some kind of like secret joke. Or a lot of these guys thought that they were literally just like shooting the shit. There was no actual planning taking place. So like if you're going to, let's, for example, say, engage in a conspiracy, a criminal conspiracy to kidnap a governor, and you actually are planning to take out her security detail, as they say these men were going to do, and somehow do an amphibious assault. This is one of the things they argued. They were somehow going to paint Ty Garbin's boat black. They're going to launch it from the boat launch at Elk Rapids, and they were going to somehow get to the back of her vacation cottage property, take out her security detail after doing their amphibious landing. So coming out of this little boat, they're supposedly going to be doing a tactical extraction from her cottage of like, they're going to kidnap her detail. Then what? Ferry her out into this little boat and then go where? They're just in Elk Rapids. If you've seen her vacation cottage, and you'll see it in the documentary, you're going to see the lake. It's a little circle. Okay, where do you go from here? Oh, they were going to have a Black Hawk helicopter, don't you know? That apparently one of the guys who was pretending to be a Navy SEAL, Sean Fix, claimed he could obtain a Black Hawk or a Huey. And then they were going to somehow take her to Wisconsin and do a show trial. Like, this is all silly talk. If somebody was really planning this, you would have like overt acts taken in furtherance of the plan. So they would need things like walkie-talkies. They would need to have lots of ammunition. They would need to have the helicopter, for example, or you need to see them actually doing something besides talking.
And of course, that would have been played nonstop in the media, and we would all be acutely aware of all of this evidence. You don't see it
because it doesn't exist. And so for some of them, they didn't have any footage of them shooting their firearms. They took a video of Paul from when he was getting his CPL license and played it in court as if this was him at an FTX. That happened. That's completely like fabricating evidence there. And this is why it's difficult to even say entrapment, because that implies they were induced into committing a crime. No crime was committed. They didn't try to kidnap her. The government didn't like arrest them as they were like ready to go en route to do something. None of that happened. So to just explain, this was the setup of setting up the FTXs. The government set up the shoot house at Cambria. They used their informants' fake charity. So the pedo informant set up a fake charity called Race to Unite Races, and he was offering guys credit cards with a $5,000 limit, they were told, where they could, because the FBI wanted them to make large purchases of ammunition or gear, that they could say, hey, look, they were stockpiling, they were planning to do something. All of these people turned down the use of the credit cards, including the homeless guy. What does that tell you about their criminal intent?
Right.
Right there is also evidence of the massive entrapment, but it gets worse. So towards the end of the summer of 2020, the FBI has gotten nothing off the ground. They've spent millions of dollars on their terrorism enterprise investigation, and they have nothing to show for it. So they're like, we need to get these guys to do something. So, and the FBI, this came out in federal court. They testified they set up the first recon, the so-called daytime recon of Whitmer's vacation cottage. They picked a date and time. Gretchen Whitmer, she picked a date and time that was convenient for her. So this was arranged by the FBI, Michigan State Police, Gretchen Whitmer, her team, her security detail, the Michigan Attorney General's office, DOJ. Like, they pick a date and time convenient for Whitmer. The FBI installs pull cams on her property in advance because they're wanting to catch these guys on camera to get them doing something. And they have their informant, Big Dan, pick up Adam. Adam, of course, people don't know this, he was taking steroids at the time, so he would get very hyped up and amped up and talk very excitedly about things. Everybody knew it was literally just talk. They laughed at him. They called him Captain Autism. So he's thinking that this is like fun, like, oh, we're going to just drive by her house. He probably didn't even know that it was illegal to do so, which it really isn't illegal. I mean, it's not private property. Anybody could literally drive down that street, and that doesn't mean you can be arrested for it. But they claim they had intent to do something. I think Adam's intent was to get stoned and have a fun evening, and thinking he was hanging out with his friends, and none of this is serious. They pick up Eric Molitor. Eric was never part of any of these, of the Wolverine Watchmen or any militia group. He had his own group called Cadillac Crew that he set up during the time these riots were happening, because they were going out and they were actually trying to defend people, defend businesses, protect them from looters and rioters. So he also had worked security with Adam during the summer. And Adam worked security for U.S. Marshal. People don't know that. So he gets a text message from Adam, hey, we're going to go check out a high-profile vacation cottage. You want to come? Eric says, oh, sure. He, in his mind, is thinking, oh, because they'd been tracking BLM rioters to the hotels they were staying, because they were coming in from out of town. They weren't even from Michigan. They were coming to Detroit to riot, or Grand Rapids, whatever. So Eric, in his mind, is thinking, oh, the BLM people have gotten smarter. They're not staying at hotels anymore. They must be renting Airbnbs. So he, in his mind, that's what he thinks that they're going to do. And, they've worked with like a marshal to do security. So he literally has no clue what's going on. Dan Chappell, the informant's driving the car. They pick him up. They drive him, and he doesn't find out till he's on the way that they're going to be going by Whitmer's cottage. And so at his trial later, the FBI will take audio from the ride back, 4-hour time discrepancy, and they will try to introduce that to lie and say he knew where he was going. That is outright evidence tampering, manufacturing. Agent Impala was not he was not admonished for this. They didn't call, hey, mistrial. They're literally trying to fabricate evidence here. Oh, no, he was allowed to explain it away as a typo.
That's so outrageous. I know you put out a video about 3 months ago with the current status of the appeals and everything like that, but could you get us up to speed on what is going on right now? I know that the same judge was overseeing the appeals that oversaw the trial. I don't know how that's even legal. Obviously, he's biased towards his own previous ruling. Can you just update us a little bit on the current status of the cases and where they're going in the immediate future?
Yes. So since we're low on time, there's so much more to the story. Watch the documentary to learn it all. It's much worse than you think. It was they wanted it to be 15-state plot. They claim these men wanted to overthrow the government and all this other nonsense. 4 trials, 2 federal trials, 2 state trials. So first federal trial ends in 2 acquittals and 0 convictions for the government, where they have a 99% conviction rate. Think about that. What a humiliation that was to them. So with this mistrial on Adam and Barry, they retried them in a horrible kangaroo court show trial where they couldn't introduce evidence, couldn't call witnesses. And the They even imposed a time limit on the defense only to cross-examine key witnesses, people who were coerced and pressured into taking plea deals. So that happens. They had to convict Adam and Barry first because they could not get the other 8 guys on the state charges of providing material support without the convicted terrorists. So they had to do that first. Then they did the rush trial in Jackson County. Joe Morrison, Paul Beller, Pete Musico, convicted for providing material support. They could be incarcerated until 2063. I want people to understand that. Paul was 21 years old when he got arrested. He was a kid. Joe was 24. He's a father of 2. His father-in-law was arrested also. So that family lost their grandfather and the dad, like the 2 men of their household. Now the women have to work. They never had to do that before to support their families. So the last state trial ended in all acquittals. The Null brothers and Eric Molitor were acquitted. So it's 5 acquittals total. Daniel Harris, Brandon Caserta, Eric Molitor, Bill and Michael Null. 5 men are still wrongfully incarcerated. Adam Fox and Barry Croft are currently at Florence Supermax. An interesting thing about this is after their trial, this was, I believe, pre-sentencing. Right after they were convicted, I wanted to get their statements from them while they were still at Newaygo County. So I got statements from them for the weaponization committee. I was interviewing them for the documentary. At Barry Croft's sentencing, Nils Kessler, the prosecutor, was quoting from his interview with me the night before and saying, like, he's completely radicalized. He's like the blind sheik. He all of a sudden decided Barry was the spiritual leader, and they sentenced him to 19 and a half years at a supermax, and Adam Fox 16 years at a supermax prison. The night after I got their statements, they were shipped out the next day. Typically, that doesn't happen. Like, after your sentence, there's some time before they process you out and move you to where you're going to go. They sent Barry to Terre Haute, and they said they were going to put him in the communications management unit, so he couldn't talk to me. Other things.
What about access to his attorney? And then I also heard they don't have access to the Michigan Law Library anymore.
They like moving these guys around, by the way, is called diesel therapy. So sending him from Newaygo to Terre Haute, then sending him to Florence, and it keeps it so that it's difficult for them to remain in contact with people. Barry has been completely prevented from speaking with me, which he predicted would happen. It's difficult for them to speak to their lawyers. These appeals lawyers, by the way, are court-appointed lawyers. So I think that they're doing their best, but I'm always cautious about the public defenders because of literally they walk these guys into these prison sentences, in my opinion. So right now, Adam and Barry's case is before the Sixth Circuit, and this is whether or not they're going to get a new trial. So the Sixth Circuit had oral arguments on their appeals in May. The next month, June, I believe, they requested additional briefings on what was called the out-of-court statements. That is a bunch of statements that were exculpatory that the guys said, where they said, like, they didn't want to kidnap people, or it's incriminating things that the informants were saying, where they were suggesting things like firing rounds into the governor's house and like blowing up Tannerite in her driveway to scare her and send a message, or where they were telling Frank Butler to create an army and a QRF and all this other stuff. So the Sixth Circuit asked if these exculpatory evidence was introduced and they were allowed to see this, would this have substantially changed the outcome of the trial? The answer is obviously yes, because that ended in 2 acquittals and a mistrial on Adam and Barry. They were very close to acquitting them. They just weren't sure. Had they seen the totality of the evidence, we know that would be the case. So right now, those additional briefings have been done. We're waiting on the Sixth Circuit to tell us if they're going to get a new trial, and they should. But I don't trust the Sixth Circuit. I think they're waiting until after the election because they're clowns. But we have to pray for them that they do the right thing. And then for the last 3 guys who were charged at the state level, on the eve of their appeals, they were shipped from MDOC facilities to federal BOP facilities across the country. They sent Joe to Pekin, Illinois. They sent Paul to Schuylkill, Pennsylvania, and they sent Pete to FCI Gilmer in West Virginia. So the goal of that was to get them away from their families, make it very difficult for their court-appointed lawyers to communicate with them. And then we know from court filings with their lawyers that legal mail was being returned. So they're trying to, they can't get on the phone with these people. The lawyers, when they were having phone calls that are supposed to be attorney-client privilege, those phone calls were being monitored by a third party. We know that's the FBI. So hello, finally, after 11 months go by, their appeals haven't started yet. They bring Joe and Paul back to Jackson County, where they're at right now. But the judge overseeing this right now is Judge Wilson, the guy who oversaw their trial in Jackson County. Michigan, they say, is different than the federal court system, so I don't know why this would be the case, but they say they're trying to expand the record at the Court of Claims or something. I don't have a lot of hope or faith in the Michigan court system, I'll say that. Gretchen Whitmer is herself the head of the MDOC. She's their governor. I don't believe these judges have the spine and the backbone to be fair with these men. I think the state of Michigan itself is biased because it's an injured party, according to them. Like they're a victim. Even the attorney general, they now claim that Dana Nassel was one of these guys' targets. Well, where did that come from? We didn't hear that at any of the trials until now for the appeals. And it's like, well, if that's the case, how is the Michigan Attorney General's office prosecuting this then if they're the victim?
Yeah.
And Whitmer, so-called. She gave a 3-minute long victim impact statement at the sentencing for these guys, where she told the judge to throw the book at them and said that it was about defending democracy and all this nonsense. And she tied it to like J6 and mass shooters and blah, 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 blah. And then she, in her book that she just put out, True Gretch, she claims she never once has feared for her life. And it's like, okay, so you lied at their trial. You committed perjury. Nothing's going to happen to you. And you yourself planned the recon of your vacation cottage. You are more culpable of being a participant and a co-conspirator than these men who didn't know where they were going.
It's so outrageous. And of course she never feared for her life because she was getting advance warning of everything that was going on because the FBI was planning it all. So obviously she perjured herself. Nothing is going to happen to her. We should all keep that in mind. I know we're running low on time, but could you talk a little bit quickly about funding? You need funding to finish this documentary and what you've done and what needs to be done, and how people can get you some money for your project.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. The documentary is completely like crowdfunded. Last year, we put out our first trailer after I'd only done one interview with Brandon, the one of the guys who was acquitted, and we used that. We put out our first trailer last year, used that to kind of fundraise to get me to be able to make multiple trips to Michigan to interview the guys, their families. I've interviewed a lot of the targets and unindicted co-conspirators, eyewitnesses, people who attended an FTX or a meeting. So I've traveled across the country, across 8 different states. It's so voluminous, like trying to understand, like to explain to people so they can understand what I'm dealing with, like 30 terabytes of footage, documents, archived news footage, archived trial footage, transcripts of the federal trials because it's not televised. Like it is a massive project. It requires me to make multiple trips to Michigan to film, to get B-roll that I need at locations of interest. An interesting thing happened with my drone when I was flying it over the lake. It literally just dropped and went right down into the lake. So I lost my drone and had to buy a new drone. It's always something. And it's very expensive to make and produce a documentary of this kind. We just put out the second trailer that shows basically all of the work we've been able to do with the funds that we raised up to when we just released the second trailer. I encourage people to watch that one. I'm super, super proud of it. That shows also how much we've improved our skills. And I believe it kind of can compete at an industry level, you know, with kind of like the thing you would see on like a documentary you might see on Netflix.
Oh, it's so
That's
good.
the
I've linked it
quality
below.
we're
I've
going
linked the
for.
trailer below. There's this moment in the trailer where Gretchen Whitmer does her creepy little smile, and it's
God.
just like edited so perfectly. I watched it like 3 times.
You know, that was the press conference that when these
Oh,
guys
yeah.
were arrested, where she
Yeah.
supposedly was, just learned of this
Yeah.
plot. And she's like,
She's just-
she can't contain that narcissistic
Yes.
euphoria.
She's
and
got a real
glee
psycho face,
that
that
she,
woman.
oh my God, she does. She's a freak. But
So
she
I've
is
linked all of your
formidable.
stuff below, but she has an excellent website, and that is where you can donate funds. I
Yeah.
implore you that anything you were going to give to me during this show on my Subscribe Star, please donate to this project. We have to get this finished. We have to get it out. There are people whose lives are still in turmoil, and we can really do something about it. And I want people to know that the government hates you, and that we could be these guys. Any one of us could be these guys.
And it makes a difference. Like these guys believe that this documentary could help save them more than like they have faith in the legal system.
Yeah.
They need to tell their stories. They were told they didn't need to testify at trial, so they never got a chance to tell the story of what happened to them. People have never heard the real story. And the other thing is nobody's coming to fund this. Like no big name conservative outlet is going to come donate the money we need to get this finished, to get it out in a timely manner. Like I can't wait 3 years to try to work and save up the money other ways to do this. Like my family has dumped thousands of dollars into this, and equipment and our own money to try to get the project done. We have to meet our fundraising goal so we can pay our editor, hire him an assistant, pay a colorist, archive the news, license, archive news footage, because we foresee lawfare coming at us once we put this out. So I have to make sure that I have to pay somebody to fact check for me. I have to pay researchers, people to help me also go through all of the documents associated with this, because there's a lot of that. So
and you've had debanking issues.
Oh yeah, I've had that. Definitely. It's been nonstop. One thing
I get emails from people all the time, like, oh, they feel blackpilled. They're like, what can we do? What can we do? This is what you can do. I don't know anybody that's working on a more important project than you are at this very moment. So please check out her links in the description. Thank you so much for joining me. That was so informative. This is Christina, Radix Verum. Check out her Twitter, which is linked below. Please watch her documentary when it comes out. Check out the trailers, which I've also linked below, and her website. Thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.